I am very excited, and I'm sure many of you probably already follow Jess online, but very excited here. I'm going to bring up Jess Piper. Jess is a fierce advocate for rural communities and public schools. She was an American literature teacher for 16 years and decided to run for a House seat in Missouri's first district in 2022. Although she lost the race, she continues her activism, and we are so glad for her activism. I see Jess everywhere, you guys. This woman is never home. She is the executive director of Blue Missouri and writes a Substack called The View from Rural Missouri. So, Jess, welcome. We're really glad to have you here.
I am so glad to be here, and I'm sorry I'm running this like I usually do mine. I keep admitting people.
Oh no,
It's
you know what?
good.
That's good. Julie is doing that. I was doing that. We're gonna have a lot of people tonight, so we have to keep admitting people. Okay, well, just to start off, I know many of the people follow your Substack and are well aware of everything that you do. But for those who are brand new to Jess Piper, can you please tell us a little bit about, yourself, how you got involved in public education advocacy, and what's Blue Missouri?
Yeah, so I was American Lit teacher for 16 years. I ended up running for office, and in Missouri, Missouri is one of four states where you can't be a teacher and also run for office. And so I ended up having to walk away from a career that I absolutely love. But the reason is because every time I was going to vote, there were no Democrats down ballot. There was no one I could vote for. And I finally got sick of not having anyone to vote for, and also sick of the trope of, you get what you vote for in states like mine. And I was like, friends, I've got no one to vote for. I don't know. I don't know what to do. So I took it upon myself. I ran for office. I got my butt kicked. I mean, taken to the woodshed. But here's the thing: in my district, we've never elected a woman. Hadn't elected a Democrat in 32 years, so I knew what I was up against. Lost the race to a man who actually took 12 max out donations from people who are trying to privatize our public schools. And after I lost, there's no infrastructure for losing candidates. And I couldn't go back to my teaching career because I said a lot of progressive things that folks in my tiny little town, I live in a town of 480 people, cornfields and bean fields, and people wouldn't want their kid in my class. And so that makes it difficult because I was the only teacher 7 through 12. So I ended up going to work for Blue Missouri, and now I'm the executive director of Blue Missouri. And what we do is raise money for down ballot Democratic candidates who don't get money from any other organizations. And so that's what I do full time. I absolutely love it. I write the Substack, and I am online and on the road a lot, talking to people trying to be a cheerleader for rural communities.
Yes, well, that is so needed, and we really appreciate your work. And you're so right. There are so many places where, I mean, even where I live in Warren County, Ohio, there's just not a lot of times not anyone to vote for. And you're right. People just kind of have that, oh, you get what you vote for. I totally agree with you. So let's start with the basics here. So we're talking about vouchers tonight. So can you just kind of explain what are school vouchers and how do they work?
So my friend Josh Cowan has been researching vouchers for a long time, and he has this explanation, which I think is fantastic. If it funds private school tuition, it's a voucher. So there are a lot of ways that they try to get around it, not say the word voucher. They'll in Missouri we have something called ESAs, which are educational savings accounts. But basically, it's where someone can put money into an account for someone. It doesn't have to be their child or anyone they know to get tuition at a private religious school, and they get a dollar for dollar tax credit. So there's a real incentive for people to purchase a voucher for somebody else that they don't even know, purchase several vouchers for that tax credit. So anything that takes taxpayer money and sends it to a private religious school is a voucher.
So how does a savings account work in that? If you're saving money in a savings account, how does that become public funds?
They're pulling money from, they're getting this tax credit. So this, instead of going into the public kitty for all public schools, it's coming back to them in a tax credit. And this goes to fund, it's basically a coupon, because in Missouri, 2/3 of the people who received an ESA for their child already had their child in a private school. It's even worse in states like Arkansas. 95% of the people who received a voucher were already sending their children to private schools. So it's just a coupon for people who were already able to pay for private religious schools. And I need to say something really quick. A lot of people will say it doesn't necessarily fund religious schools, it can just fund private schools. Where are those? Come to Missouri and show me a school that is private and not religious. Good luck.
Okay, that's a good point. And thank you for explaining. I just want to make it really clear about the tax credit, and that's where the public funds are coming in from.
Yeah.
So vouchers, though, are often framed by people on the other side as a choice. Um, can you explain why this is misleading or just flat out wrong in so many cases?
And because we don't have choice. You can give me 20 vouchers. The closest private religious school that I could send my kid to is 56 miles away, one way. So it doesn't matter. There is no choice out here. The only choice that you've taken away is the public school that my kid went to. And it's no choice either for people who have children with disabilities, people who may be gay or their child is gay. Private schools can decline to take a child. Public schools do not. Public schools take every child. So we're giving taxpayer money to schools that can discriminate against children.
Do you have any idea what, like, how many schools roughly are funded or how, I'm sorry. I took, okay, I got the wrong question. Let me start
It's
over
okay.
again. Can you explain a little more then about how school vouchers are funded? Because you talked about the savings account where you get a tax credit. What are some other ways? Is it just something like the government just says, oh, we're going to put this pot of money aside for vouchers? Like, how does that work in other places?
That is what the Trump administration is saying. We're going to take this pile of money and we're going to send it to these private religious schools. And people say, well, where's that money coming from? Usually it's coming from Title One funding. It's funding that should have went to public schools to educate children with disabilities or children who are marginalized or oppressed, poor kids, districts like mine that are poor districts. This money that should be Title One money is now pulled out and sent to private religious schools that can then discriminate against the children using that money that should have been funding for them the entire time. In Missouri, we just passed, our Republican legislators just passed a bill to give $50 million to private religious schools. Now, let me tell you something, Julie. Missouri, we've moved up. Missouri was 50th in starting teacher pay. Now we're 49th. I don't know who's behind us, probably Mississippi, because that's our state motto. Thank God for Mississippi, right? And no, no shade to people from Mississippi, but we are now 49th in educational funding and 49th for starting teacher pay. So for 20 years, under 22 now, a Missouri GOP supermajority, they have defunded our schools gradually and over time. They have pulled the funding. They rearranged the funding formula so that every year they can say we fully funded schools. When they moved the bar, they lowered the bar. And so now they're meeting this lower bar. All these years, they said we can't afford to pay teachers. We can't afford to fund rural schools. But they found $50 million to send to private religious schools. And a couple of years ago, and this is how they were able to do it, they'll sit there and say that, public schools are no good. Public school teachers are no good. And after COVID, we kind of had some lower scores. Well, of course, kids weren't in school and they were learning online. Every Republican representative ran to a microphone and said, see, we told you, these schools are no good. These teachers are no good. To which I say, who's been in charge of the schools for 22 years? Who has pulled the funding from schools for 22 years? So they create a problem and then they try to put a voucher out there and say, okay, now we can fix the problem if we will just fund these schools that kids like mine don't even have access to. And what they've done through all this time, Missouri, 33% of the schools in Missouri are on a 4-day week. We can't afford a fifth day for kids in districts like mine because the state has stopped funding the schools. At the same time, they found millions to send in vouchers to private religious schools.
Yeah, and that seems to me to be the point, right? They pull money and they from the schools slowly but surely, and then they can say your schools are failing. I live in Ohio. I feel you. So
Yeah.
we're building a sports stadium in Ohio in our budget. So I think it's like what, $600 million. But they're paying less for the schools. Um, So I guess I'm curious as to what organizations or groups or like, who's behind this push for vouchers? Like who wants it?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have to remember where vouchers originated. They were originally called, they sent this money to segregation academies. It was exactly what you think it is. After Brown v. Board, there was, this big movement to keep white kids from going to school with black kids. And so Milton Friedman, who was kind of the father of libertarianism, he created the voucher system and said, we will give you government funding and you can send your kid to a segregation academy and we will have all white schools and all black schools again. So that's where vouchers originated. And the people who are supporting it is like the Heritage Foundation. In my part of the world, it's the Herzog Foundation, Americans for Prosperity, the Federation for Children. So Americans for Prosperity is Koch money, and the Federation for Children is DeVos money. So these names should sound very familiar to you. These are all really, really wealthy billionaires. Why are they so concerned about, vouchers? Why would they do this? Because they don't want to pay taxes. They don't want children to go to all the way through school. Milton Friedman was very famous for saying that poor children should have a rudimentary education. Third, fourth grade, learn to read a little, write a little, and then go to work. And I want everyone on this call to understand you don't need a tinfoil hat to understand they are rolling back child labor laws at the same time they are defunding education. And we are sending our workers back to Mexico, to El Salvador, to all these places. And people say, who's going to do the work? The children? I mean, obviously, Florida just rolled back their child labor laws saying that children can work overnight in factories. This is all happening right in front of us, and every one of us should be able to recognize what's right in front of our face. There's a reason they're defunding education. There's a reason they want some kids to get a voucher. Because, like I said, there's no place where my kid can use a voucher. In rural places, they will close the schools, they will get rid of the teachers, and they will send our kids to work because that's all they think our kids are worth.
And I think it's also a valid point to say is just because you get a voucher, like they say the choice, right? But if you are a family, like you said, so many of them are already sending their kids to private school, and this is just extra money in their pocket to pay for what they can already afford to pay for. And those families who financially cannot afford the private school, a lot of times the voucher doesn't even cover the price. So even if they happen to get a voucher and they happen to get admitted, which is also potentially a long shot, then you're still potentially not even being able to pay the tuition. Does that sound correct?
Yeah, and you know that it's not meant for poor kids, marginalized kids, oppressed kids, because look at Iowa, where they just passed a voucher scheme. And what happened to Iowa private and religious schools? They upped the tuition because they don't want the riffraff. They don't want my kids in those schools. They don't want, other people's kids in those schools. They want the ones who could afford it in the first place. So obviously it wasn't, and they do pass this off as like there are kids in these failing schools, and the way we can get them out is to give them a voucher. It's not true. You know what we could do for failing schools? Take money and fund the schools, pay the teachers, make sure that the kids have the facilities that they need. There's this big push in Missouri. There's a lot of southern schools like around the Springfield area where they are building indoor football arenas at public schools. Meanwhile, my school, that's a couple blocks down the road, doesn't have a track. The book my kid brought home for social studies was old enough to vote. My kid's book didn't know that we elected a black president. They didn't know that Katrina had happened because that's how old the books are here. We don't have science labs. These are the things that are happening. Our kids eat in the gyms because we don't have separate facilities. And there are other schools that are building indoor football arenas. And that's because the way we have funded schools in this country and in states like Missouri is so inequitable. It's done by the taxes that the town is able to put out. Well, friends, I bought my farmhouse for $29,000 in 2017. Okay, how much tax money am I contributing, or are my neighbors contributing in this depressed area? So when the state pulls the funding, and sends that funding to private religious schools, they're relying on my town of 480 people to be able to make ends meet. We can't. We have to have that state funding, and they won't send it to us, and that's why our schools are 4 days a week. We can't afford to keep the lights on.
So you mentioned a couple of things that the people who are supporting this, number one, just some believe philosophically that we just don't need to educate everybody and we give rudimentary education. Some people want to see a workforce. Some people just don't want to cut their taxes. What about privatization of schools? Isn't that an income making source for certain people? If schools are all private, then
I mean, the people who are running the school may be able to line their pockets, exactly. But yeah, the rest of us no. And I need to address something too. When people think about, like I was just talking about my rural school and how we are lacking in a lot of facilities. Well, people will say, if we only had a private school here, you know what opens up in towns like mine? It's not, some school with leather bound books and these great instructors and lawns and the uniforms and all the things we think of when we think of, oh, captain, my captain, when we think of these private schools. What they're getting is an old Pizza Hut. What they're getting is a strip mall where they put kids in desks and they're facing, cinder block walls and they're working on worksheets or they have a Chromebook and they can go outside and play in the parking lot, right? These places aren't what they're supposed to be. They're fly by night. They open up, they close down within a year, and kids are left without a school. And by the way, they took that funding from the school because every kid that's got their butt in a seat in my local school is contributing $7,000 to the school. And people say, well, let the money follow the kid. All right, you took 7 kids out. Does that mean we don't need a librarian anymore? Does that mean we can cut teachers in half? No, you still have the building. You still have to have the teachers. You've got to have the cafeteria. That is how it defunds it. You can take the money, but we still have to have the same amount of folks in the public school because, by the way, all those kids with disabilities are not going to be accepted. So now we have the children who are the most expensive, who need the most care and the most time, and they are left in these buildings that we don't have any money for.
I've also heard horror stories about kids who, maybe do have disabilities or something else, or maybe they're just kids who struggle in school and they do go to these private schools sometimes, and then they kick them out and they get sent back to the public school for so that it doesn't look bad on their graduation rates. And oh, there's so much going on with this. It's really uh, hard. Just it's all connected, just so you guys can
Yes.
follow it and figure it out. So what are some of the potential or even actual impacts, and you've kind of already just covered this, but on a public school that has students getting voucher money and like you said, losing $7,000 per student that leaves or whatever the amount may be in your state, how would that actually impact public schools?
It would close schools like mine. And what happens is in these communities is once the school is gone, the town is gone. So this is very purposeful. And like you said, it's all interconnected. And I can tell you how that looks. They're hollowing out rural spaces across America. We've already lost family farms. We've already got, concentrated animal feeding operations coming in and polluting with impunity and not paying the taxes that they're supposed to. Well, if the rural community has collapsed, there's no one to demand these CAFOs, do what they're supposed to. And so these towns just collapse. And if my town school collapses, well, my child's going to have to go to a school that's 30 minutes away. But on a bus, that's an hour and a half. So she's going to be transported an hour and a half one way and an hour and a half back. Do we know what that sort of time does to these kids? And I can get my kid to school, right? I can drive her to school. But people who have to show up at a factory at 5:30 in the morning can't get their kid there. Their kids are going to be the ones who suffer, and these are already the kids that are suffering. So these vouchers do nothing with it's just such an outright lie. It makes me so mad when I hear them say that they're meant for kids that are poor and struggling in struggling school districts because it's just not true.
One of the things that people were asking was they were signing up in so many questions was what about accountability? Do these private schools, Jess is laughing, so you can already tell the answer to that question is, And I'm sure it depends by state a little bit, but like, what kind of accountability? You get this public funds, you get this voucher money. Should you have to report into the state about your students? Oh, and overall, what is the accountability for private schools that are getting these funds?
Nothing. Not in my state. There is no accountability. They don't have to take the state test. So like I said, our legislators came and said, "See, these test scores are bad." How would we know how the private religious school is doing when they don't take the same test, when they're not held to account, when they don't have certified teachers? And you hear a lot about teachers unions and that sort of thing, people just dogging teachers unions. Go out to any part of rural America. There are no teachers unions. These teachers are not unionized in the first place. Not that that's a bad thing, because when a union creates better conditions within a school, guess who else benefits from that? The kids, not only the teachers, but they get great teachers who are paid what they're worth. And so these teachers stay. You can go to a district like mine where they start off paying teachers $33,000 a year, where that means after teacher retirement, they're walking out with $1,500 a month in their pocket. How long do you think they stay? So my daughter has a brand new teacher. No shade to new teachers. I was one too. But she's got a brand new teacher in second grade, then in third grade, then in fourth grade. And soon enough, you have an entire building where the only person who has any tenure has been there for 7 years. That's happening all across our state. And so we're losing teachers, obviously, and these young teachers leave to go to better places where the pay is a little better. But it just impacts every single part of not only the education system, but our entire society. Rural spaces cannot keep going when we don't have schools. My kids, I've got 5 kids, I've got 4 grandkids. Guess how many came back to my town? None. There's no, there's daycare deserts, but beyond that, a 4-day school week is not workable for almost any family.
Absolutely. All right, so we have been talking quite a bit here about the state level, and I know some of you out there are in blue states, and you're thinking, not in my state. Oh, let's talk about the federal level. So, Meg, I'm going to bring Megan up right now. Jess, we will give you a little break so you can just go get a drink or something and chill out for a sec. All right, I am happy to bring on Megan Hester. She is with the NYU Metropolitan Center for, I'm going to get this right. Can't read my own writing. For research on equity and the transformation of schools. It's a long
Got
time.
it.
Write it down. So Megan, let's talk about the federal level.
Okay.
And what I have heard about is the Educational Choice for Children Act, ECHA. What is that and what does it do?
Yeah. So it is a new federal voucher program. The Republicans tried to pass it last year and were unsuccessful. And because they know they don't have the votes in Congress to pass this, because vouchers are incredibly unpopular at the ballot, and anytime they're voted on, generally they know they're going to lose. And so they are pushing it through the budget reconciliation process that is happening right now in the Senate. So it passed out of the House and it is now going to the Senate. And it is $5 billion a year in taxpayer money over 4 years. So $20 billion in taxpayer money going to private schools. And it's just like Jess explained, it's a tax credit voucher program. So families are eligible to take this money if they make up to 300% of the annual AGMI, which is like an income level for your area. So that means in a lot of areas, like Julie, I was just looking up in Ohio, like in one of the counties I was looking in Ohio, that's $384,000. You can make up to $384,000 and get this federal taxpayer money to send your child to private school. And the way that and just like Jess said too, there is absolutely no oversight. These schools do not have to be accredited. They don't have to have certified teachers. They don't have to have building inspections. They don't have to follow academic standards. They don't have to report academic outcomes. They don't have to do anything for this taxpayer money. And the way that it's funded is that instead of paying your taxes to the federal government, you can essentially pay your taxes straight to what's called the scholarship granting organizations, which give money, they funnel money to the voucher schools. So you get a 100% dollar for dollar tax credit for giving money to the scholarship granting organizations. Now, fun fact, if you donate money to any other nonprofit, right? Like the domestic violence shelter or, the gardens or, the animal shelter, whatever it is, right? You get 37% tax deduction. This vouchers program, ECA, gives you a 100% dollar for dollar tax credit. So it's 3 times more money back on your taxes than if you donate to any other nonprofit. So, not only that, but for wealthy folks, if they donate stock into this program, they get the dollar for dollar tax credit plus a waiver on capital gains. So it actually costs not only the money that is not being paid in taxes, but it's also the additional loss of the capital gains taxes for folks who, have a lot of stock that they can donate. So that's the basics of this federal voucher bill.
This sounds like something that very wealthy people might really want to lean into.
Absolutely. I mean, if you're a wealthy person and you have an accountant, that accountant should absolutely be advising you to pay your taxes directly to the scholarship granting organizations, right? Because you'll get all this money back. You don't have to pay capital gains. It's a huge tax shelter for the wealthy.
Yeah, we did a video on this in case you guys haven't seen it, you can go look for it. And we were calling it the Billionaires Bankrupt Public Schools Act because that's really what it is. So even in blue states, so do governors or state legislators get any say in how this money is used?
Absolutely none. In fact, the way that the bill is written is it forces some of the money to go to every single state. So that's including states like Nebraska, Kentucky, and Colorado that just this past November voted down vouchers, that they did not want vouchers. And all the other states whose state legislatures have rejected vouchers, they will be forced to take vouchers with ECA. And there's absolutely no oversight. Neither the governors nor the state legislatures have any power over these scholarship granting organizations. They can decide how much money to give. They can decide who to give it to. They can decide whether to have oversight or no oversight at all over the schools. And there's absolutely no government control of that.
Okay, that's why I wanted to make sure everybody in those blue states knew about that because that's coming your way as part of budget reconciliation. It's already gone through the House. It is in the Senate right now. So we are going to have an action for you to call your senators to talk about that in just one second. So the impact that Jess talked about of public school and vouchers, this would have the same impact. We're talking about defunding schools, rural schools closing. Anything else you want to say on that?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think just that, every student that leaves for a private school, the public schools lose money. And not only that, I mean, the objective of forcing this on every state through this federal bill is to normalize the use of public funds for private schools in every state, which then paves the way to state voucher programs. And so that's the objective, is to really get every state to adopt it on the state level as well. And that's what they're going for here. So I think if this bill passes, we can expect a lot more voucher programs at the state level.
Somebody asked one of the questions coming in, so I'm going to ask you real quickly. Does the Department of Education potentially being defunded or closed or whatever it does they want to do have any impact on ECA or federal voucher bills? Or
Yeah, it's a great question. I think what it does, it's even less oversight, right? So the bill actually, has very little oversight built into it, but anything that the Department of Education might be able to do to make sure that there's not fraud, waste, and abuse with these dollars, it's not going to have the capacity to do. And I think, that's the objective, honestly. They want this money to just go to any school to use in any way they want. And because the Department of Education is so understaffed now, they're going to be able to do that.
okay, well, I am going to drop in the chat and I'm going to ask you this, but we do have an action you guys can take to call your senators. It's a link. You can just read about it real quick and then you click to call and you just get immediately connected to your senator's office. If you're intimidated about calling anybody, do it right now because they're not there. You just leave a voicemail. So I'm going to drop that in the chat right now. I will also make sure I send that out after the event. So there is the link and I'll drop it again at the end. Anything else that you wanted people to do or actions they can take at this
I mean,
point?
I think calling your senator is the most important thing. And I think it's just important to know that I think there's a real chance of defeating this. So I'll just say that when this bill came into the House, it was $100 billion, $10 billion a year for 10 years. Because of all the advocacy that's happened, it's now reduced to $20 billion. So we've cut this thing down 80% already, and gotten a little bit more, some language in there that makes it a little less bad. And so we want to kill it entirely. And there's just, particularly, states that have rejected vouchers. There are a lot of senators who are actually against this. We just need them to fight for it. We need them to prioritize it. We need them to know that their constituents really care about it. But there is really a chance of getting enough senators to just strip this from the bill, from the reconciliation bill. So we got a real fighting chance here. So every call makes a real difference.
Okay. Thank you so much, Megan, for explaining all of that, the horrifying bill. Okay, Megan will stay on and we'll take questions at the end, so she'll be around to answer those questions. I'm gonna bring Jess back up and we're gonna continue the conversation and then we will go to the Q&A because I know there are probably a lot of questions in the chat. I see Julie furiously writing up there. So, um, people love to know how to talk to their friends about this. So, and we've already talked about some of the misconceptions, like it's a choice. But what are some of the more common misconceptions you think people have about school vouchers, and like how do you respond to them, or how would you talk to your friends or your neighbors about it?
The fact that they use the word school choice, because that's a misnomer. And so when I was knocking doors in rural spaces, people would say, I think choice sounds good. And I would always say, friend, you just said you love your local school. And they're like, yes, I do. Well, that would defund your local school. And this is why we need candidates out there talking to people, because it's very confusing and they do it on purpose. I mean, just think of right to work. We all want a right to work, but it's the opposite of that. And so getting out and talking to your neighbors and telling them this defunds your local school. We know in Missouri, 93% of kids are educated in public schools. People love their public schools. This defunds Friday night lights. You won't have a local football team. Your daughter isn't going to be able to play for the Mustangs, right? She's going to have to play for a different team. And by the way, a lot of people live in these rural areas, one, because we don't like people telling us what to do, and two, because your kids get a really wide range of opportunities because there's just not a lot of kids. And so, your kids' ability to play sports may be impacted. And so just reminding them of what public schools mean to us. And I'll tell you, I knocked 1,000 doors in rural Missouri, Northwest Missouri. Not one person came to the door and said, you know what? I'd like to send my tax money to private religious schools that my kids can't attend. And that's the message to get across to them, especially in rural spaces. And I saw somebody say earlier, aren't these rural spaces the ones who vote for, Trump and these things? Again, that's why we need folks knocking doors to tell them, to connect, a policy to the lawmaker. And in rural spaces, this has become very difficult for rural Republicans because they know they have to toe the line for the Republicans, but they can't defund their school because they're going to have hell to pay with their constituents. And so working this in with rural legislators is very important. My legislator, he disappears when it's time for a vote. He can't vote either way. He has to vote present or he has to be absent that day. And so we know that's where we apply the pressure. And in Texas, they were able to stave it off for a couple years by applying that pressure. And it eventually fell. But Megan was just saying something that's very important. School vouchers have never passed on a ballot ever. They're so unpopular, and that's why they have to use the back door. They have to get legislation put together and then pass it, through these red state legislators, because it will not pass. Look at states like Arizona, which Missouri is trying to base our voucher scheme on. Arizona blew a 1 billion with a B, $1 billion hole in their state budget because they were handing out vouchers like candy. They took $300,000 from every single public school in the state. They can't fund infrastructure. They can't build roads because they have given away all of this money to people who sometimes have spent the money on a ski trip to Colorado, horseback riding lessons for their kids. These things are ripe for corruption, and that's how we need to talk to our neighbors about it.
Yes, absolutely. So are there local schools or that are fighting back on this, fighting back against vouchers that you know of? And what can parents and educators do to get involved? And I love what you said about talking to the legislature about it, because you're right, just like ECA is being folded into the budget bill so it can kind of hide, that's what happens in a lot of state legislatures too.
Yeah, so there's lots of schools districts in my area where the superintendents will actually write a letter to the editor. They will visit PTA meetings and tell parents, hey, if this goes through, our school could fold. And so there are communities coming together to fight back against this. Um, in bigger places, they're able to absorb this cost a little more, but small communities cannot. And this is a real way to engage people in politics and something that doesn't feel like politics. I mean, it's literally saving your local school. So superintendents are very, they're with it. Principals, I've seen a whole lot of organization and PTAs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's so important. My next question was really about the role of local elections and school board races and why they're so important. But you kind of touched on it, but you feel free to go ahead and answer that, because obviously it's important to have somebody calling attention to this.
It really is. I mean, if we looked at places like Florida where Moms for Liberty really took hold, they decided that they were going to play politics at the most local level, which was school board races, and we saw the damage and all the horrible things that happen when we allow these elections to go uncontested. We saw book bans. We're seeing the Ten Commandments being forced into schools. All of these things happen at local levels, which is why we have to contest every single race.
Absolutely. And this is why, we say a lot, our big thing is we want you guys talking to your friends and your neighbors, because a lot of people, either number one, are getting disinformation, misinformation about this, things like choice and all of that. So you are the ones who can really make them aware of this, and being the ones to show up at town halls or making those phone calls to really put the pressure on legislators about this. And it's so important to use your voice. We always say, we are the majority when it comes to public education, and we are by far the majority. People love their schools, like just said. So don't shy away from these conversations, because people really do want to support, especially when you talk about your teachers and your school. People love their public schools. So before we get to Q&A, which I'm going to start soon because I think there's going to be a ton of questions, what keeps you motivated to keep doing this work, and what gives you hope for the future?
I'm mad. I am so I am fueled by hate at this point. I mean, I wake up every morning just punching, figuratively, not literally. But no, it's the thing that a lot of people will say, if you don't like it, move. Maybe you don't belong in Missouri. This is my state too. This is my state. This is where my 5 kids and my 4 grandkids are, and I'm not leaving. And I'm going to fight until my very last breath, until every person in my state has access to healthcare and education and roads. I mean, they've defunded our roads. You meet a combine out here, and you're in trouble. There's no shoulders. And so it's all of these things that are integrated together. And I'm not going to back down. I'm not going anywhere. My kids deserve the same thing in Missouri that kids in New Hampshire or New York or any other state in this country deserve.
Absolutely. Well, Jess, thank you so much. I'm going to bring Megan back up and bring up Julie so we can get to all of your guys' questions, because I know there are a lot of them.
First one that I'd like to myth bust here. Someone keeps putting in the chat that the average teacher pay is $120,000. $443. And my mother was a school teacher. I would just absolutely love to know, where in the world are they paying teachers that much?
I can tell you from experience. I left the classroom in 2021, 16 years of experience with a master's degree, and I made $41,000 a year.
Yeah. I figured that was not probably not an accurate figure. And if it is, somebody's making a lot of money somewhere, because most of the teachers I know don't make anywhere near this. Okay, so let's get into the meat of this. Someone asked a really good question, I thought. They asked, if they live in an area where there's like no private school anywhere near them, do these vouchers hurt them or hurt their school district?
I can start, Jesse. Yes. So what happens is your taxpayer dollars are going to pay for other people to go to private school. So that means less taxpayer dollars for you for all of the other things that Jess mentioned, like what's happening in Arizona, right? You are essentially paying for kids in urban areas to go to private school with your tax dollars.
And like I had said, that defunds my local school, which is already defunded. All these schools are running 4 days a week, and I don't know what we do. Go to 3 days a week, or we shut down the schools and we're shipping kids an hour away.
Mhm. Um, so once it passes at a state level, is there any way to reverse the course? Someone asked.
Yes, there is, by getting new folks in your state legislature, who can, take it back, who can write a bill to change things. Just like, so Missouri is like a lot of other states. We have a separation of church and state. We have in our Constitution, it specifically says we can't send taxpayer money to these religious schools, which is why we do an ESA program, which is why we do a scholarship program. So they have been slowly eroding our Constitution in Missouri, but with the right people, we can pull that back.
And I'll just add that last year, Illinois was actually the first state to kill their voucher program. So they had a voucher program that sunsetted, and they fought hard to the Republicans in the legislature wanted to renew it. And a group called Illinois Families for Public Schools fought, and they got the program to end, and it's now gone. So it can happen.
And in states like Arizona, there's a great organization called Save Our Schools Arizona, and they have been working hard since the voucher scheme passed a few years ago. So there are organizations in every single state specific to fight back.
So somebody asked, what income levels does this benefit? I think we all know the answer to that, but go ahead.
It doesn't benefit anyone like me, that's for sure. Like I was saying, there's nowhere to send my kid, and we all know, in Iowa they raised the tuition on top of the voucher, so obviously it wasn't meant for people in a low income.
Yeah, and in every state, the voucher amount is far less than the average private school tuition. So if you don't have additional money to pay for that private school tuition, that voucher's not going to do you any good.
Plus,
Mhm.
you have to drive your kid there. You have to provide lunch for your kid. You've got to buy a uniform. You have to pay to play. So on top of that tuition, there are so many other fees that regular folks just can't afford.
That folks are asking for a fact sheet because they're loving all this information, but probably like me, they can't write quick enough to get all this down. And plus, they want to have it down. So I know Julie is going to send a follow-up email after this is over tomorrow, probably, and she'll have a lot of this information, I'm assuming, on it.
Can I also plug something? There's the Network for Public Education. They have a free toolkit for specific to vouchers, and you can go to the Network for Public Education and just download that toolkit.
Okay. So what folks, another person asked us, how does this affect blue states? You know, we're all here sitting talking about red states that we live in, but what about blue states?
I'll say they're going after blue states with this. So this federal voucher bill it is forced to be in there's actually a requirement written into the bill that 10% of that $20 billion has to be distributed evenly among all of the 50 states. So every state will have to have scholarship granting organizations that give money to vouchers. That's required as part of this new federal bill. So we're gonna get I'm in New York here. We're gonna get some of this money if if ECA passes. But the folks with all the money that are behind all of these voucher bills in all of these states are going after blue states. They did the red states, they've been going after the purple ones, and they're going after the blue ones. So it's coming everywhere.
What I will say is that people like the Heritage Foundation have been using states like Missouri, Iowa, Arkansas as a proving ground, a testing ground to see what flies and how to figure it out. They figured it out, and now they're planning to take it nationwide.
So somebody said, one of their friends has said that money should follow the student whether or not they attend private or public schools. So what is your thoughts on that?
Like I said earlier, okay, money follows the student, and now it's going to a private school. Of course, it's going to a system no matter what. They like to call public schools government schools. But I say if you're taking government money, you must be a government school, right? I mean, you're just sending money from one system to the other. However, you're leaving a lot of kids who don't have any option in a school that is defunded.
One of the things I've seen a lot in the chat, they weren't really questions around it, but just really more discussion about it is, um, people defending public schools and saying, the public schools are not these huge villains that they're being made out to be. And I would agree with that as a public school graduate in a doctoral program. So I must be doing something right. They must have done something right. A lot of us probably on this call went to public school. So, can you kind of speak to this, this fight? Yes, they want to defund them, and I think that they're making them a villain because of that. But you two are the experts, so
Go ahead, Megan, you can go first.
I was gonna say, I've heard people say it's like anybody you rely on basically in your life right now went to public school. Your doctor went to public school, right? The folks that, the folks who come and take care of fix your roof or whatever it is, like they went to public school. Like most of the folks who we rely our kids' public school teachers, they all went to public school, right? We know that public schools are good, and that's why the right and these, billionaires who've been funding these attacks on public schools have had to wage for all of these years this narrative battle trying to make people believe that their public schools are bad, that they're teaching their kids trash, that they're not serving their kids well, because people actually love their public schools. And polling really shows that while people have a general idea that other people's public schools are bad, they actually like their own public schools. And that public school parents actually really like their schools, people who don't have kids in public schools think that they're bad. But that's what they're fighting. That's why vouchers are so unpopular, because people actually really support and love their public schools. And that's what we have on our side. That's our superpower.
And I'll say that I was born and raised in abject poverty. And I went from poverty to a graduate degree because of public schools, public school teachers, and access to Pell Grants, which they're trying to get rid of all of those things. Born and raised in evangelical. They don't want people like me to exist or to rise up through. And the best way to negate all of that is to get rid of public schools.
Mhm. So someone asked, would this be helpful in the next election as something that we can point to that's bad? And
Absolutely. There are a couple things that are completely nonpartisan, and this is one of them. Roads, the post office, keeping hospitals open. All of these things are completely nonpartisan. Like I said, I never knocked a door where someone wanted their public school to close. It is a big issue. Right now, it has been for years.
are there any lawsuits being filed in different states?
Yeah, the Education Law Center, as well as the unions, the NAACP, and a lot of other organizations have filed lawsuits in a lot of states. And if ECA passes, we'll file it at the federal government level as well. And a lot of places have won, right? Last year, South Carolina, the Supreme Court knocked down their voucher law, and Mississippi knocked down their voucher law. So in state after state, the Supreme Court, because of these suits, many state Supreme Courts have knocked down their voucher laws because they have stuff in their constitution saying that public funds can only go to public schools. So the law's on our side.
So then somebody said, how do these vouchers or the choice programs impact paying people to homeschool?
Yeah, in homeschooling in Missouri is not regulated at all. You have to show up once a year with a binder saying that you taught this many hours. But then to give funds to people to homeschool is again another way of defunding our local school and potentially having people. And I'm not bashing homeschool at the moment, but it doesn't work for most people who need to work for a living. And it's again defunding the public school.
Yeah, and the ECA bill will also allow the money to be used for homeschool and micro school. And you mentioned just Save Our Schools Arizona. I don't know if you saw last year they did an amazing action at their state house. Well, they brought some of the things that homeschoolers have bought with public taxpayer dollars. So they had jet skis, they had a trampoline, they had these all this crazy stuff, huge Lego sets. Scooters, like all of this stuff that people have been able to buy with public money because of the homeschool stuff, like basically just about anything. I remember they had a list actually that showed there were very few things that were rejected, but there was like a $5,000 Rolex watch. There was a home vasectomy kit that somebody bought with their public school voucher. I kid you not.
I might be for that one.
You know, you could
I'm
even
like,
do
I have
homestead.
so many questions. Like, is this for practice? What is that? What I don't understand.
Yeah, so anything you can imagine, people will buy with their school voucher.
Oh my gosh. Okay. That's interesting. That just blew the question that I had in my head right out of my head. Hold on, let me go back and see if I can. Oh, Jess, will you please explain what Substack is? There were several people who
Oh,
said, "Oh, you have a Substack," but they don't know what that is.
it's like an old-fashioned blog. I write a couple times a week, and let me tell you, the only reason I started writing one is that one of my state senators made me so angry I didn't have room on Twitter to talk about how horrible he was. So I was like, that's it. I'm starting a Substack. So it's like a blog. I send, 2 or 3 out a week talking about rural politics usually.
Does this bill, this federal bill, does it apply to all charter schools? Because in North Carolina, apparently charter schools are considered public.
So interestingly, charter schools are going to suffer from this too. It doesn't, charter schools are public. You don't have to pay for them. So you don't need a voucher to go to a charter school. In fact, the charter school should be very worried about the voucher bill because students will leave charter schools in the same way that they will leave public schools to go to the voucher schools. And charter schools get their money from taxpayers. So to the extent that the public money for public schools is reduced, charter schools will lose money as well. So they're in really the same boat as the public schools when it comes to vouchers.
And I keep seeing over and over again that that folks are not quite 100% understanding this. So is there a way that we can kind of maybe simplify this down? So this federal bill as an example, and I think some of the state bills are similar. Jess, am I right about that? Um, where is this, what money is being used for the vouchers to start with? Let's start there.
You want to give it a shot, Jess? It is confusing.
It is confusing. And people always say, well, if the kid's not there, what does it matter? But like I said, you still have to have the building for the rest of the kids. You have to have a teacher for the rest of the kids. So you're defunding that public school by taking that kid out and taking the money out with them. And now people are getting a dollar for dollar tax credit. So that money, that those taxes are going back to people who are buying scholarships for other kids. And so it just takes the money out of the kitty. We all pay taxes and it goes to that big pile. And then our state divvies it up. Well, there's fewer taxes now because those people got big tax credits. And so there's less in that big pile.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, then um, there's that big pile of money and it's divvied up in the school district per student. And
Yes.
so if a student leaves, they take that out.
Yes.
Okay, so
And
that's the means of the defunding because the lights still have to be paid, the heat still has to go on, all of those things still have to happen, and you still have to have that teacher in the classroom for the students that are still there.
exactly.
Okay, so
That's why the money following the student doesn't mean anything because you still have to have that public school available.
okay. Um, I'm hoping that that was helpful. If not, well, there's 89 messages. Julie, look at the bottom of the chat and see if that helped, please. Okay, so now somebody asked a great question. Who's going to enforce these requirements with no Department of Education?
There are no requirements for voucher money, actually. It's there specifically written to have really no oversight and no accountability. In fact, in the House version, the original House version of ECA, there was a clause that said that it is prohibited to have any government oversight. There was also this amazing clause that said that government employees were prohibited from disparaging the law. They actually they took that part out. So the Senate bill does not have that in it, nor does it have the part saying that there is not allowed to be oversight. But there currently is no oversight, and so there will be no monitoring of where this money comes from. Really, it's all up to the scholarship granting organizations how they want to require this money to be spent.
And Julie, can I take a second? Because what Megan said is really important. It's up to these people. So in our state, we selected, or we didn't, the legislators did, they picked 6 different organizations to divvy up this tax money to go to private religious schools. Well, friends, guess who is in charge of deciding where the money goes? The people who are creating the schools where the money goes. So you have people getting the money and then sending it to their own schools. In Missouri, we have the Herzog Foundation, who is one of the organizations that's meant to divvy up the money. They also create private religious schools. So it's just, give it all to me. I'll take care of it, right?
And not only that, just this, the ECA bill allows those organizations to take 10% off the top. So $20 billion, 2 billion of that is going to go to those organizations as an administrative fee.
Very good
Wow.
point.
I just popped in because I did see a question at the bottom of the 8 and 9 comments, and I wanted to make sure it got answered. Can you also explain, if you guys feel comfortable explaining this? I think there's a lot of confusion on like, what is a charter school? Is that a voucher school? What's a private religious school? Um, just kind of help define that for people.
So a charter school is a privately run, publicly funded school. So it can be run by a nonprofit, can be run by a for-profit, but it runs with public money. They can raise their own money additionally, but it runs with public money, and it is subject to some federal, some state oversight, some of the same laws that public schools have to follow. Often not all of them, but pretty much always some of them. Voucher schools are way more unregulated, and they are, so I think that's one of the main differences. Jess, what else would you say?
Private religious schools, there's something to know about this because I went to a couple of, I graduated from public school, but I went to 2 different religious schools. They can use the money because religion is sort of falling in the country. There are a whole lot of people who don't go to church anymore. Churches have figured out if they open a school, they can fill their coffers. So if you have religious schools that are getting taxpayer money, they can offset what they're not getting on Sunday morning or Sunday evening. And so a lot of these schools are popping up in places where they didn't plan to have a school, but now that they have money open and available to them, they will take it and they can teach whatever they want. I mean, I grew up thinking that, man walked with dinosaurs and the earth was 6,000 years old.
And I'll just add that currently, charter schools cannot be religious. That was just right, and there was just a Supreme Court case just last week, right, which upheld that. So only voucher schools can be religious schools.
One thing that I saw in here was that there's so much to oppose in this budget bill. Should we call our senators and talk about each topic, or call them several days in a row with a different topic each day?
I guess it
Number
depends on who.
two, call them every day.
Call him every day. And a lot of people will think there's no use. I mean, my senator's Josh Hawley. You know what I do? I call him every day because he has to know there's opposition. So even if you're in a place where you think it doesn't matter, friend, it does. And those handwritten letters really matter. They pay attention to that. So yes, every day.
Well, I know that we are at time. There was one other question that I thought was a good one, but I don't know, Julie, what do we want to do?
Are we good for one more?
And this is a good one, and I asked this because my husband lived in the state of Alaska. Alaska doesn't have a personal income tax, or so do they get federal tax breaks?
It's a good question. I don't know. That might be a stumper. We can get back to you about that one.
Yeah, they
I
have a
don't know
whole
either.
they have a whole different system up there that folks get paid yearly, some dividend, something I can't remember what he calls it, but it is quite different than anywhere down in the contiguous states. So
Interesting.
Sorry, guys, we didn't ask for them to be experts on the on every single state. What we would love for you all to do tonight, beside go talk to your friends and your neighbors and everybody you know about vouchers. This is our click to call your senators and ask them to oppose the ECA. Take it out of the budget reconciliation bill. They're trying to hide it. So please make those calls. I will send an email tomorrow with as many resources as we can find about vouchers and also with this call to action. So if you don't want to do it right now, but it is there, it's really easy. It'll take you just a few minutes. There's a script there to read if you makes you feel more comfortable. Thank you so much, Megan, for popping on and really leaning in and explaining the federal to us and answering questions. And Jess, thank you so much for your time. Hopefully, you get a lot more people now on Substack, that everyone knows what Substack is. So follow Jess. She's amazing to read. I hope everybody has a great evening, and we will see you again soon. Good night, everybody.
Bye.
Y'all.